Hello. Howdy.
Welcome.
We'll do a panel, and I'll see you guys in just a few minutes.
Julie, you're good to go.
Hi, my name is Julia Conrad. I'm the campus recreation coordinator here at OSU-Cascades, and we're super excited to have you join us tonight. We've got an excellent group of panelists here. Our discussion is diversity in the outdoors. So I want to thank them for their time being here and you for your time joining us. And to start us off, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. These are treaty lands. Before this place was called Central Oregon, Indigenous people lived here, traveled, traded, fished, and thrived here for generations. After the Treaty of 1855, tribes in Oregon were forced to give their lands to the US government in exchange for limited rights, including the customary use of the land and self-governance as sovereign nations. These Native people were relocated to smaller reservations, often far from their original homelands. OSU-Cascades is located on the ceded lands of the Northern Paiute, the Wasco, the Klamath, the Warm Springs people, and others, many of whom were relocated to Warm Springs Indian Reservation and are now the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. I just think as we're talking about being outside and enjoying the outdoors, it was appropriate to recognize the lands that we're on here in our local region. And with that, I would love to hand this over to Noah. Noah works with Cascade Adventures, our campus recreation program, and has done a lot of work pulling together some awesome folks to have this discussion. And so with that, Noah, take it away.
Thank you. First off, thank you for joining us this evening to talk about diversity in the outdoors. Each of our panelists will talk about their experiences as underrepresented groups in the outdoors. We will start with introductions from our panelists, then dive into the panel discussion, all of which will last about 40 to 45 minutes. Public questions will be collected throughout the panel, and we'll take about the last 15 to 20 minutes to go through those Q&A questions. All right, so for people that are going to be submitting questions, here's the link. Am I sharing screen? Is it showing up now? Okay. So if you go to that website and follow that code, you can submit questions throughout the discussion, and then we'll get to those at the very end. Okay. All right. All right, so let's jump into the panel. So I'm gonna have each of you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what experiences brought you here. So let's go ahead and start with Aaron.
Sure. Again, my name is Aaron Paulson. I just want to thank you all for allowing me to come and share a little bit about myself and how I got involved. I grew up, actually I was adopted in Bombay, India when I was about 6 months. So many years ago, my mom picked me out of a catalog knowing that I contracted polio. And the cool thing about it was that she knew that I probably would have some struggles and some roadblocks and some barriers, but she was very determined to allow me the opportunity for growth. And one of the things that she did was got me involved with swimming. There were many sports that I couldn't really get involved with. And so I started on in an early age and found a lot of success. Later went on to compete in several Paralympics, 5. But later on, I was striving to find something else to do something else that I could compete in. And so at the athletic club I was at, I ran into Sam Drivo, I would say a world-renowned kayaker. And he said, you ever thought about getting into flatwater sprint kayaking? And so he said they're going to open it up in 2016 for the Paralympics. And so basically that's kind of what brought me in the world of realm of outdoor activities, was to train for the 2016 Paralympics. So basically, if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be via online with you all, sharing a little bit about myself. So truly grateful to be here and hear the other panelists' stories as well.
Awesome. Pat, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Noah. My name is Pat Addabbo. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Adaptive Sports. Oregon Adaptive Sports is a nonprofit. We are based in Bend, Oregon, primarily providing outdoor experiences for individuals with disabilities. In the Central Oregon area, we run a full adaptive ski program at Mount Bachelor and at Hoodoo. We do some outreach and traveling clinics occasionally around the state. We also have a growing summer program providing adaptive mountain biking, cycling, hiking, golf, rock climbing, and paddle sports as well. More recreational, not so competitive. So we'll have to send them to Aaron if they get to that level. But we currently, prior to the pandemic, we were serving about 500 unique individuals with disabilities every year, supported by 200 to 300 volunteers. Those numbers have changed a bit over the past year, but still a very thriving community.
Thank you. Lizzy? Oh, you're still muted.
I'm really good at these panels. My name is Lizzy. I am the co-founder and owner of SheMovesMountains, which is a rock climbing guiding company with all female instructors. And our mission is to create a safe space for women and gender minorities to learn technical rock climbing skills from women, and to be like 100% transparent. I didn't really think much about what it meant to be a woman when I was growing up. And then when I started rock climbing, I realized it mattered to a lot of people and to myself that I was a woman. And so it has been a journey to start this company and to grow it, and also really awesome and equally hard.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so to start a discussion, I want to start with a question for all of you. Question is, how do you see yourself or organization represented in the outdoor industry or community? So go back to Aaron to start out.
Sure, thanks for the question, Noah. I've always found honesty is the best. And so, and I'll start with being a competitive swimmer. I didn't really see a lot of people of color. I'm actually from Bombay, India. And so for me, I didn't, again, really think much of it. I just sort of got in and did my thing. And kind of as the years progressed, as I'd stepped out of the Paralympic realm and gotten more involved in kayaking, I often wondered why there wasn't more people of color. So for me, I think it's really important, and I'm so grateful and thankful we're having these discussions that we're involving, more diverse backgrounds and people getting involved, because I think there's so many opportunities that can be open for everyone. And so I came in with the thinking that here I'm somebody with a disability, a person of color, and hopefully they'll see that, hey, I can do that. I might have a disability. I'm a person of color, and I can get involved. I think that's the great thing of sports. It's open to everyone, and not everybody's going to be a basketball player or a football player or baseball, which is all phenomenal, amazing sports. Don't get me wrong, but I think that's the unique thing about sports. And I see, hopefully, myself as just being a proactive and advocating for the world of kayaking, per se, and swimming. So that's kind of how I see myself, as being a person that advocate for disabilities and kayaking and outdoor sports.
Awesome. Thank you. Pat, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, thanks. Personally, as a cisgendered straight white male, I see a lot of me in the outdoor industry, and I think we all do. And I'm excited to continue to see more diversity, more representation. I've been working full time in the adaptive sports, outdoor sports industry, so to speak, for 12, going on 13 years. So I've had a lot of personal exposure to athletes and individuals with disabilities, recreating in the outdoors. And I have seen an increasing representation of that population in outdoor recreation media. There are brands that are onboarding athletes with disabilities on their sponsored teams. But the representation is still incredibly low compared to that which they represent of the overall population. I think it was in 2018, the Oregon Health Authority completed a study that resulted in 24% of adults and 30% of youth Oregonians reported living with a disability. And I guarantee you, if you scroll your Instagram feed or you browse the websites of major outdoor recreation brands or providers, you don't see anywhere near that type of representation. And then even within the nuance, of adaptive sports and disability, and perhaps Aaron, can speak to this as well. There is growing representation of individuals with physical disabilities, but I would still say there is even more so a lacking representation of individuals with intellectual, developmental, cognitive disabilities, of which those are populations that we serve many of every year. They're avid skiers, mountain bikers, climbers. If you come and do a day with OIS, you'll see that the population of the outdoor industry can be very diverse, especially in an ability standpoint. If you browse our website, you'll see the photos that prove it. But in a general sense, those that we serve at OAS, that we provide access to the outdoors, help remove those barriers for, are definitely highly underrepresented, I would say, in the grand scheme of things in the outdoor recreation industry.
Awesome. Thank you. Lizzy, go ahead.
I've been sitting here trying to think. You sent these questions to me, so I should have a great answer, but how do I see myself represented in the outdoors? When I first hear that question, I think about social media. And a few years ago, I started to write this snarky post on this account, and it was a bunch of beautiful women sitting in these gorgeous places, but wearing like clothes that weren't appropriate for the setting, for example. So they were wearing like dresses on the top of a mountain, and you're like, that's not, and it was, and I just felt like there was no representation of like what it looked like when you were actually out there as a woman. And so I made a commitment that I was going to start using social media as a way to show what it looks like to be a woman actually doing things, which basically means like doing exactly what the men are doing and showing photos that are similar. And I realized when I was making those criticisms that my criticisms were kind of not okay, because those photos are beautiful and they exist for a reason. And like I think that there's space for both. Whereas before I used to see these images and think like, that's not real, this is. I think I've grown to be like, that's real and make someone feel alive. And I can exist in these spaces in the way that I am. Something that's been really neat since I started, I think I went down that journey about 6 years ago. And I kind of felt a little bit lonely in it at the time. And I was given opportunities by different brands to come on photo shoots. And I would make a commitment that I would come, but for their photo shoots, I refused to wear makeup. And they all allowed me to show up just how I was and come and be on these photo shoots. And since then, I have seen such an increase in women outside crushing it and doing like just amazing representation. SheMovesMountains started right before the Force of Nature campaign came out from REI, which was a huge force for that. There's Hey Flash Foxy, started by Shelma June, who also has done a great job promoting women in the outdoors. And so when I first started in this world, I didn't see a lot of myself. There's an anecdotal story It's a study from a book called Black Faces, White Spaces. And it talks about flipping through magazines and just seeing like how many Black people or people of color end up in these. And there's just basically none. And so I like to play these games where I'll flip through magazines and see where are women showing up and how are they represented when they do show up. And I must say that in the last 6 years, it has changed so significantly, and I'm proud to see the changes. I think that it's a step for in terms of the visual representation. Now, on the other side of things, like I'm still at the level that I climb. I oftentimes have to climb with men because there aren't a lot of women who have the same schedule with me and the same availability and want to climb at the same grade. So I hope that this visible representation in media can translate into the actual world and to the guiding world. If the numbers right now, I believe, are at 14% of AMGA guides are women, where we represent 50% of the population and maybe even more than 50% of the guided population. And so I have been doing a lot of work to help change that. And then, sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but you can't help but talk about diversity of women and increasing women in climbing without noticing the lack of the intersectionalism when it comes to that. It's a lot of white women that are showing up. And so I don't see, I'm mixed race, but white presenting for sure. And so I would love to see more changes that show a greater diversity of women and more support for women of color and women from different backgrounds in these sports as well.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into panelist specific questions. So we're going to do a question for each of you and just kind of round robin it. So starting with Aaron, what opportunities and barriers did you face getting into swimming as a kid? And how has that experience impacted you?
Great. Thank you for the question, Noah. So I'm just going to throw out my age. This probably helps to give a little bit more perspective. So I guess I'm 45. I still consider myself young, or 44. But when I started really about the age of 12 or so, getting into the Paralympic swimming kind of movement and understanding what it took and what it takes, the big barrier was trying to show that I could compete with able-bodied, meaning people that use their legs. So I'm somebody that my legs are, I have legs, but I'm not able to use them to kick. And so it was explaining to officials not to disqualify me for doing breaststroke because I don't kick. And so they would consider that an automatic disqualification. And so they had to make some adjustments, and everybody was learning kind of as they were going along, figuring out how I swam and not to disqualify me for that. But a lot of the barriers, I think, was people would look at me and, well, how do you swim? And how do you do that? And it was more for me to say, you just have to watch. And I think we all have a passion to show the world we can do things. But I think it really comes down to is being open and honest and giving people a chance to show what they can do. And so that was the biggest barrier I think I felt is that people just starting out just assumed that I couldn't do it unless they saw me actually in the water and swam. So that was a big part of it. And then also just trying to tell myself that knowing that I'm not necessarily going to beat somebody else that's using their legs. And so for me, that was a mental barrier. And I had to be honest with myself and say that it's okay. It's okay that you're not necessarily going to beat somebody that doesn't use their legs. That's part of sports. It's part of winning and losing. It's, I think, being a good competitor, you know those boundaries, but at the end of the day, knowing that you're proud of who you are. So I think these are all things that kind of has allowed me to transpire to who I am today. Like everyone, you have your ups and downs, but I think you take those moments and you learn from them and you try to pass that on to show whoever you're talking to hopefully give inspiration that that's part of it, and it makes you a better person, as well as hopefully everyone else that you're trying to pass those messages and those words of wisdom along.
Awesome, thank you. Moving on to, moving on to Pat. In your words, how does access to outdoor environment or to the outdoor environment impact the lives of people of all abilities?
If you are fortunate to have spent a lot of time in the outdoors, I think that you know the benefits. They're somewhat immeasurable. The health, the community, the connection with nature, sometimes it's indescribable, the benefits you get from even just spending 15 minutes sitting in a grassy field in a park. It doesn't always have to be an intense skiing experience or paddling or climbing or mountain biking experience, though sometimes those initial experiences can be gateways to some of those higher adventure sports. There are increasing and growing studies that you can research on the actual benefits of being outside, the medical and scientific, the impact on your heart rate, as soon as you step out of your car and put your phone in your pocket and start walking through the park, to the obvious like fitness and physical benefits of exercise and gaining skill and independence and confidence. So it, in our vision at OAS, at Oregon Adaptive Sports, is a day where everyone, regardless of ability, has access to those benefits of outdoor recreation. And what we are working on, which I think we may talk about later, is removing the barriers to that access. We don't make the magic of that is skiing down a mountain. That comes from the experience in and of itself. It's the barriers that are in somebody's way that we help to remove, so they can experience that for themselves. So everybody maybe gets something a little different out of it, but it's incredibly important. I think it's ingrained in us as human beings to want to be outside and have a connection with the environment. And there are, I don't know, it's hard to just say. I guess the benefits are so many in being outside, and the opportunities, I think, continue to unfold as one gains experience and confidence. And overall, pertaining to this topic, a sense of welcome, being welcome in that space can often sometimes be the biggest hurdle for somebody. And if you can get over some of those hurdles and barriers, the benefits will play themselves out.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's Cascade Adventures with OSU-Cascades. That's one of our big things is new students coming in, getting them to meet people and feeling welcome and being in the outdoors. So that's definitely pretty awesome. So moving on to Lizzy, in your words, describe any barriers you have experienced and continue to experience in today's outdoor industry. How has this impacted you?
A lot of the barriers come from other people. When I first started climbing, I have a great example. Yesterday, someone had asked about hiring a guide, and one of my guides recommended SheMovesMountains or Timberline Mountain Guides, and the person said girl guides, and I said women, and he responded, I can't afford to climb with girl guides, and told me that the reason for that was because I was unqualified and I didn't have enough experience, despite the fact that I've done the first ascent of a 513 climb and have climbed in mountains all over the world. People look at me, I'm 5'2", and just assume that I can't do these things. And so when you have people questioning you all of the time, anytime it happens to me regularly. These aren't just like experiences that happen every once in a while. I'll go out to a climb and it's just people's amazement at what I'm able to do. They're like, you put that up, and it's like my warm up. And like, I try to just be kind and accept it, but I can't help but wonder sometimes, like if they would have responded the same way to a cis white man that was a little bit taller than me, if they would be so amazed at what they're able to do. And it's happened when I was down climbing in Patagonia, and someone literally who had no idea about my experience or skills told me that I shouldn't try the climb I wanted to try without having any prior knowledge of me. And I have had people interrupt me when I'm teaching a lesson out at Smith Rock to challenge my lesson and ask me questions that don't pertain to what I'm teaching. So basically I'm like harassed and questioned every step of the way, all of the time. And for a long time, it made me question myself, and it made me feel this need to prove myself, which showed up in me being somewhat aggressive, and asserting and being really showboaty, because I felt like I needed to prove myself. I needed to show that I belonged in these spaces, which meant being someone who I didn't like. And so for a long time, it made me incredibly insecure. I went into every situation feeling like I didn't belong. And so when I would take a course, I would like train ahead of time. No course feels like a course for me. It feels like a test, like people are going to be looking at everything I do. And so no learning environment feels safe. It feels like every time I go in to take any guiding course that have to perform, that it's not a place for learning. And it's pretty horrible to feel that way. And over time, I've gained a little, I think through SheMovesMountains and seeing the learning environment that we've created and how unfair it is for me to have felt the ways that I have, that I've learned that I just need to be more confident and show up. And so I do. I continue to take courses. I continue to go out into these spaces, but I also don't just accept those comments anymore. Also, I try not to be a jerk in responding, but I also think I've had so many people tell me to let it go. And I think that's not fair. Like, why can't the response be like, we need to call attention to these negative behaviors and point them out? Because if we don't, then they will continue. And if we don't like point out like how inappropriate these comments are, then they're going to keep happening. And so for me, it has just been a huge practice in doing what I need to do to take care of myself and stepping away. I've become way, way more introverted, but also stepping up and taking up space. And for me now, it has turned into me being even more feminine in these spaces than I had been historically. So before my rock guide course, I went and got my nails painted hot pink, and I got a pedicure and got a hot pink rope. And so it's been a practice in playing with it, because it's like the way that it feels to me, whether or not it's real or imagined, is that like no way I can dress and present myself is going to make you respect me. So I'm going to show up as girly as I can, and my climbing will show you that I like belong. I belong here. It's been really hard, and it's a consistent challenge for me that I have to face all of the time. And to be quite honest, it's not just from men. When I recently did a first descent, somebody mentioned it to someone around me, and they're like, wow, I didn't know Lizzy was that strong, or wow, I didn't know she climbed that hard, or that's surprising. You're like, man, okay. But I don't know how it's going to change. I think it just takes continuing to show up and continuing to challenge what people think a climber looks like. And so I think that is why I've just become even more like typically feminine in these spaces, because I can still climb hard. And that's a really great gift to be able to have, and earn their respect through my actions. So it sucks that I have to prove myself, but I have, and now I've gotten this space where I can now challenge that, how it has been.
Thank you. Thank you. Back up to Aaron. Have you faced prejudice for either your race or disability? And second part to that, if so, what happened and how did this impact you?
Thanks for the question, Noah. Yeah, so this one, I think this question reverts back kind of, I think, where I was alluding to in the very beginning, where I didn't really growing up understand a lot about myself as far as being a person of color. I always was in this mindset of gotta get to practice, gotta train, gotta do all these things to just solely focus on my competition, my event, and I never really thought about my race and how that potentially played a factor. And really what it came down to, I was actually talking to my wife the other day, and she said, well, maybe Aaron, it was your disability that people looked at opposed to your disability. And so it was a really interesting conversation that we had about it. And I said, that probably makes sense, because sometimes when people identify me, it's, oh, it's Aaron with the crutches, rather than, Aaron, oh, he's a person of color. And I was always sort of the person that, I would identify somebody by their name, not necessarily, oh, that person's brown or black, because I feel that you owe that person to know them by a name. And so for me, I think it was more of probably my disability. And I kind of felt, I think, like maybe Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. When I was in really elementary, how do I fit in? I wanted to throw the football, which I could, but I just couldn't run as fast as the other kids. And so, and I don't think it was the intent of every kid to really try to be mean, but I think it was more the way along the lines as Pat and I think Elizabeth is alluding to, is we all want to fit in, and it's finding that inclusive environment, adapting and being open and honest to having those conversations and dialogue about our differences, which that's what makes us amazing people. I mean, I think we learn from everyone, and I think for me, I continue to learn, and so I think I kind of pushed it aside, and I really like Elizabeth's point about not being afraid of who you are, and I think deep down inside, we may do that and not knowing that, and I think if we can really say, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be who I am, and not worry about judgment, and feel comfortable. I think that's a true testament to our community and society, not to allow us to feel that there's something wrong or different. And I also, would credit my mom for allowing me to be who I am, and never, saying you can't, because there are ways of doing things. We just may do them differently, and finding our strengths and talents. So that's kind of been my sort of my journey.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, outdoor community, I've definitely noticed that people are able to kind of open up and be themselves more, and it's kind of more welcoming than some other communities I've been in before. And you get some weird people coming in, but weird's good, and it's pretty awesome. So thank you. Going on to Pat, what steps can be taken to get more people with disabilities into adaptive sports? And this is a two-parter. What barriers are preventing those steps from happening?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer that in reverse order, because the second question sort of answers the first. The barriers that we focus on at OAS, there are many. We try to categorize them down into, I would say, 5 areas. The first is access to adaptive sports equipment, or the barrier really is the lack of availability and often the astronomical cost of outdoor adaptive sports equipment. For example, sit ski, someone that has paralysis, or, for whatever reason needs to sit down and ski, amputee, balance impairment, there's many reasons. An average entry-level program sit ski starts at about $6,000, and that doesn't include bindings and actual skis. That's just the frame and the bucket, as we call it, the seat. The costs really go up from there. Off-road hand cycles, upwards of $15,000+. But even down on the smaller scale, if you think of somebody that just needs a set of adaptive pedals, maybe they are able to ride a traditional off-the-rack, so to speak, bicycle, but they need a specialized pedal to help provide additional bracing to the lower part of their leg. Those pedals run in the $400 to $500 range versus $40 to $50 for a pretty decent set of pedals that you could pick up at any local bike shop. So OAS maintains a current inventory of over $200,000 of adaptive sports equipment that we provide access to through our programming. The second barrier that we focus on is the need for individualized support or instruction. So a lot of times, somebody that has a disability needs specialized and highly trained individuals to support them to get into that sport. They may not have success showing up to a 10-person group ski lesson. For example, at Mount Bachelor, they may need the support of 1 or 2 or 3 individuals to physically help them learn, or to give them the information and instruction that they need, because a disability may present as very unique for somebody. So we have a professionally 100% certified adaptive ski instructor team of about 15 that works with us in the winter. We work to recruit and retain high quality staff and volunteers, and we provide hundreds upon hundreds of hours of training every year that helps support the growth and development of our staff's education. The third and fourth barriers, an obvious one is accessible transportation. We do provide accessible transportation often when we can. Accessible transportation does not reach many of, especially Oregon's iconic trailheads, lakes, outdoor spaces. So we maintain a small vehicle fleet and provide that as part of our programming. And the fourth barrier that we focus on frequently is the cost. Outdoor sports are expensive from the get-go. And as we mentioned, this equipment is a big cost, but just the general cost of participation, lift tickets, paying for those instructors, paying for insurance. So we work really hard to offset the cost for our athletes that participate in our programs. This winter alone, we awarded approximately $80,000 in subsidies for athletes to participate in our winter programming. And then the fifth and final one falls more into this realm, and that's doing whatever we can as an organization to increase the representation of individuals with disabilities of adaptive sports in the outdoor recreation industry. We think that if the conversation starts as inclusive, whether it's in a design or marketing standpoint, then some of these other barriers may actually dissolve before they're ever even built. So the designed environment is one that is often created by people that are not of diverse backgrounds. And if we can represent those voices from the onset, it's possible that programs can be designed to be less expensive, or there can be accessible spaces and transportation available, or perhaps equipment involved, so that OAS may not have to physically be there to be present to create that access. So addressing those 5 areas is what we work on to increase the involvement and access for people with disabilities in the outdoor industry and outdoor recreation. That's what we can take on as an organization. As an individual out there in the community, you can sit in and listen on things like this. You can sign up and volunteer with programs like Oregon Adaptive Sports. If you're local to Oregon, there are hundreds of types of organizations like ours across the country. So whether you're in Oregon or Colorado or Vermont or Alabama, there are adaptive sports types programs that often rely heavily on volunteer support. And I think to Lizzie's point is being confident and asking the hard questions sometimes. If you arrive at an outdoor recreation space and something's, from my standpoint, looking at accessibility isn't accessible, asking why isn't this, or why can't we make this more universally designed so that everybody is welcome, and having the confidence to not just push that off, but to step up and speak out on behalf of others, even though it might not in the very moment benefit you personally. In the long run, it will, because you'll help create a more inclusive space and a better environment for you as that individual and everybody else that may participate.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, as a trip leader at Cascade Adventures, I'm always trying to get all students included in everything. So, any barriers I can break down and take from all the panelists today, like any barriers or anything that you say that could help bring more people in, going to take that with me for sure. Really appreciate you answering that. On to Lizzy. And you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but still more specific. Do you feel there are adequate opportunities for women to become leaders in the outdoor industry? And then just touch on a little why or why not.
I think that there are many, many opportunities for women to get into leadership positions in the outdoors, but I think that that's not really the issue. The opportunities are there, but the culture isn't there to support them. And you can create a million scholarship programs, but if you don't change the culture so that people so that women don't have to feel the way that I felt going into those programs, it's not going to bring more women into it. I think about that a lot with SheMovesMountains. We are changing the culture. We are incredibly welcoming. The way that we teach, we basically talk extensively about how to teach rock climbing without using rock climbing words, and how do we make this space feel more welcoming. Like the AMGA, which is the American Mountain Guide Association, has created many scholarships for women, but if you still show up and you're the only woman in these spaces and the curriculum hasn't changed to include you, then it's not going to actually make it a more inclusive space. It's just going to make more women feel isolated in these spaces. So I think what we really need is a culture shift. I think we need to keep challenging what it means to be a person in the outdoors and how we communicate with each other and the leadership at these. Like, there is opportunities to get into leadership, but you don't come in and start at the top. You always have to come in and work your way through systems. And so I think a lot of the women who have made their way into these spaces have a hardness to them that shows up as, well, I made it, like, why can't you? And so they're not trying to battle the culture at this point in time because their position is that, like, well, it worked for them, so you're soft. And so I think we just need to increase vulnerability. We need to to introduce more sides of what it means to be a guide, because I think there are a lot of opportunities, but I can tell you from many of the women who have worked with us that they get chances to work, but then aren't treated as equals once they get into these positions. And so I think there needs to be more support for women when they get into positions in the outdoors. Yeah, I mean, I'll leave it there.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to do one more question per panelist and then move on to our Q&A section. So back up to Aaron. What are the biggest barriers facing Paralympic athletes as far as training and competition availability?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I think, again, I think what I am seeing, I just want to make note that I am seeing a lot more advocacy for Paralympic athletes, more notoriety, more awareness and involvement than, again, 25, almost 30 years ago when I started. So I'm really so enthusiastic to see the progress that it's made. I think, like a lot of sports, it sort of comes down to the sponsorships and money and funding. And so, and I am seeing that more. And I would also throw in publicity. So my understanding is, I think there's going to be more coverage. Hopefully there will be 2021 Olympic and Paralympic Games, assuming, if they're given COVID and everything, but there's supposed to be more coverage. So I'm really ecstatic to see that. And so I think that was a big, like any sports, athletes is finding the funding, because that's tough. And you hear about other countries that they support their athletes and food, housing, lodging, anything to prepare their athletes to perform the best they can. And so, but I have seen with Paralympic programming, military veterans programs, Paralympic programs that way to get, athletes involved and trained up. But I think we still need more, and I understand there are budgets, but I think that if we can put more emphasis on some of those programs and funding, kind of what Pat's doing with his programming, that is a great start. So I'm hoping that there isn't the barriers, and I would even make the argument for, in some cases with some pro sports, with money is figuring out to give more publicity to, I would say, women's sports. To be honest, I would like to see that. I would like to see someday even people with disabilities, sports for Paralympics, teams, pro teams, that could come about someday. I know I'm asking a lot, but again, I've seen a lot of change, and I think it's possible. So again, that's my take.
Awesome, thank you. All right, and then Pat, you've kind of touched on this in your last answer, but I kind of want to more specifically, why is equipment for adaptive sports so expensive in comparison to equipment for able-bodied individuals?
Yeah, there's many reasons to that. One is just the the market. So, it's perhaps historically, the outdoor industry has been designed to be marketed towards people like me that are able to walk into a store and pick a pair of skis off a shelf and take them out on the hill and see if they work. And I think what's an interesting perspective that I've been thinking a lot about is, the assumption is made, well, there's not enough of a market to scale the adaptive side of things. And that's what keeps costs high. And I think that certainly plays a role into why costs are currently high. But referencing the number I said earlier, 25 to 30% of Oregonians report living with a disability. Of course, those are very diverse, those types of disabilities, but there are very sizable parts of the population that would benefit from equipment designed for their needs. So I think it's a chicken or the egg type situation of, do we make more equipment and hopefully people will buy it, and by scale we can lower the price, or do we try to instill excitement and market more towards those people and have them demand the equipment, and then we'll make it and scale it. So it's an issue of scale. Which one comes first, I don't know. Perhaps an economist could speak to that better. And second, it can be just the complexity sometimes of the equipment. An adaptive off-road hand cycle, one of the ones we have in our warehouse, you're adding components. It has 3 wheels instead of 2. It means it has 3 shocks. It has an electric assist drive motor. It has a totally differently designed frame with far more tubing. In addition to having all the standard mountain biking components of derailleurs and brakes and cables and housing. So there is simply just there is more that goes into it. But the driving factor ultimately, I think right now, is scale. And I think if there was an ability to scale certain aspects of adaptive equipment, you would see that cost come down.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed going through even OAS's website, looking at some of the equipment you use, I was like blown away by the price of some of the equipment. So that was definitely something I wanted to get to the bottom of why it was so expensive. All right, on to our last question, Lizzy, and you've kind of touched on some of this. So if you want to just be more specific in the question, what were some things you did to stand out in a male-dominated environment? And I'll put another question out there if you want to answer that one instead. In your opinion, how can some barriers experienced by women be broken down? You've already touched on some of that, but if you want to go more specifically in either one.
I don't think as a woman I've had to try to stand out in these male-dominated spaces. I just do. But luckily, and also unfortunately, I'm a pretty good climber, and I don't think that should be a prerequisite for respect, but in some ways it is. And so I think I stand out because I can climb well and I climb a lot, but I hope that changes, because I do not think that your value or worth to the outdoor industry should be dependent on how hard you can climb to the middle of a rock wall. And what was the second question you had asked?
Second question was,
in my opinion,
in your opinion, how can some barriers experienced by women be broken down?
I think some of it's just going to be a shift in how we see women. I mean, I wish that I didn't have my own internalized sexism, but I do, if I'm being 100% honest. We are conditioned by our society to believe certain things about what people are capable of. And I believed I wasn't capable of these things for many, many years of my life. And so I think it's an active process of continually challenging our thoughts and the conversations we have. And also, one of the biggest misconceptions my male climbing partners have is that I want to stand up for myself and that I don't want their voice contributed. But one of the things that I think is super valuable is when someone steps in for me, because if you think about it, the people who are harassing me don't respect me. So they're not going to respect when I call them out. Instead, I'm going to be called names. I am going to be aggressive, or the B word, or this whole list of things. I think I would feel a lot more welcome in these spaces if people stood up for me when they saw these things happening. And I've had this discussion many times, and their response was like, well, you're really tough and strong. Like, you don't need a man. And it's like, well, sometimes I do, because clearly this man wasn't respecting me. So he's not going to care what I say. And if someone who looks like him, someone who he sees as an equal, calls it out, then maybe they'll listen. And even if they don't listen, even if they still have their head in the sand, at least I feel supported. And so I think that's one of the biggest things people can do, is advocate for women to be involved always, to defend them when any comment is made, whether they're present or not, and to continually challenge our own thoughts of what we think is capable, what women are capable of. And then also just making sure that our intentions are pure when we invite them out to climb with us. I mean, in a lot of partnerships, there can be other intentions. And I think being very clear and communicative about this being just a climbing partnership, and not saying that those things can't ever evolve into something else, but if you invite someone to come out climbing, being very straightforward about that, because I can tell you that women all of the time are like, oh, I think he might only be inviting me because of these reasons. So if you're just very clear that you're inviting them out to learn skills, and it might feel a little awkward for a moment, but it will make that woman feel so much more safe in that space. The awkwardness will last a second, but her comfort will carry on.
Awesome. Thank you. Definitely something to keep in mind when, as a male guide, taking people out, students, everything, to keep them feeling safe and everything. Apply some of the things you were saying there. So moving on to our Q&A from our participants. This is going to be a question for everyone. We'll just run through it. What's one thing that gives you a spark and drives your passion for what you do? So starting with Aaron.
I would say just this past year there have been some really tough conversations to have, and as we've seen in the world, and I'm just grateful that people are wanting and willing to have these conversations about inequalities that we have. And I think we really need to continue to have these and being open and honest. So it gives me hope. We've got a lot of work to do, but for start, even your discussion today is we've got to continue these. Got to. So thank you.
Pat.
I think personally, I still remember like the feeling of just like unlocking the potential of the outdoors for myself as a kid. It wasn't something that was a huge part of our family when I was a younger kid. I began discovering it through some outdoor programs in middle and high school. And I love just seeing those same moments in the people that I work with. And in my case, for the past decade or so, it has been individuals with disabilities. And I love those moments. But it's that moment. And I think we all experience that. And that's why people get into this field as a guide of any sort. It's that moment of the grace and the beauty and the awe of the outdoors just being unlocked and realizing, I am welcome here, and seeing a better version of yourself and seeing the confidence. We had an athlete this winter that has been skiing with us for 6 or 7 years. He's a teenager now. And even just from the fall to the spring, or the beginning of the winter to the end, his skiing improved dramatically, but this confidence of just sitting down and talking with him is just amazing to me. And the change that it's had on his life. And I remember going through that myself as a kid. And so that's the spark for me, is seeing those moments. And that's what, in my job, I spent a lot of time looking at the computer, at spreadsheets and writing grants and risk management policies, and less time outdoors. But seeing or hearing of those moments, makes it all worth it for sure.
Awesome. And Lizzy, yeah.
I think I get my spark because I just love rock climbing. I like think it's so much fun, and what keeps me going in this is seeing all of the women that come through the programs and the growth of the company. And I think it's been pretty cool because we aren't competitors to the other guiding company. We are bringing people into the sport that never thought they could, and I see it all the time. And like how the media that I put forth like brings people into this sport, and it's just really cool to know that I'm having, like, at this point in time, I can see the effects that SheMovesMountains is having on the community. And I think it's pretty neat to like have started this thing that is changing the culture and making it a space where women feel comfortable and keep coming back and find their strength and confidence. It's pretty unreal. I mean, we went from having 100 women in like 4 months to we're serving over 100 women a month. So that's pretty cool to, when I don't feel proud of myself very often, but when I say it out loud, I'm like, well, that's pretty neat. So yeah.
Kat, I see you got your hand up.
I was just applauding.
Oh, okay.
Those numbers. Yes, congrats. That's awesome.
All right, well, we're right about at time, so I think that's a great way to wrap up. I'd like to thank all three of you again for taking the time out of your days to join me and talk about diversity. It's definitely something that, just getting in the outdoors, fairly new in the outdoor world, seeing pretty groups being unrepresented, and hoping that there's going to be more. So I think this is a great conversation to have and continue to have. So thank you again, and I hope all of you have a great night.
Thank you.